So, hi everybody. Thank you so much for taking out the time to be here, attend this session. My name is Aisha. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer at the county. Before we move on with the presentation, and I do the formal introduction to our trainer, just a few things to take for a few things to note down that this training for both county council and area municipal councils on DEI actions, DEI conscious inclusion is being facilitated by way of a virtual meeting. Public notice has been provided to the public that this training has been hosted. This is to demonstrate accountability and transparency to the public. The training does not constitute a meeting within the meaning of the Municipal Act because there is no material advancement of council business for county council or area municipal councils. That said, there is to be no material advancement by any member of any council, and discussion will be orderly and in accordance with the training being offered only. As the training is not a meeting, there will be no minutes or formal documentation of outcomes. This session will be recorded and will be available to those who are attending and those who are not here. Um, and now it gives me immense pleasure to introduce our trainer, Michelle, who is one of Canada's most recognized voices on fairness at work. She is the founder and CEO of Empowered EDI and a certified B Corp consultancy, recognized among Women's Executive Network top 100 most powerful women in Canada. She is known for turning equity and inclusion into practical strategies that garner trust and drive results. Michelle clients span public, private, and nonprofit sectors, including some of Canada's most trusted institutions. She's also the voice behind the TED Talk question, The Impression to Break Free from Bias, and is a faculty and board member for York University, Osgoode Hall's certificate program in equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us. And now over to you.
It is my sincere pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for your time and your attention, especially at 6 p.m. All suppers are welcome. So please, if you need to turn your camera off, enjoy any moments where you're able to nourish yourself. I totally understand. It's that time of evening, isn't it? Well, as Aisha mentioned, I'm delighted to be here today to have a conversation with you about this topic of conscious inclusion. Conscious inclusion is so core to my value system as someone who cares about creating welcoming spaces where everyone can thrive. And I recognize it's also been a priority of yours over the last several years. One of the ways in which you've demonstrated your focus on inclusion and reconciliation has been through your land acknowledgement that has been put in place. That land acknowledgement is on your screen today, and it's a recognition that the lands on which all of us gather and participate are the traditional and ancestral territories of numerous Indigenous communities. I'm based in Niagara, so I have the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe communities here. For you all, I understand that that's the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, as well as the Ojibwe and Chippewa communities. And we are so indebted to each of these communities for stewarding the land, creating such beautiful traditions, for being such incredible ambassadors of resilience and love within our communities. And we also recognize how important it is as settlers to recognize that colonization has impacted these communities adversely and to take actions to dismantle those systems that might have dispossessed or have dispossessed folks of their lands and that might deny them the rights to self-determination. And so training like this is one step. Another is around giving back to communities. And so at Empowered, the company that I run, we donate a portion of everything we do to a wonderful organization called True North Aid, who is an organization dedicated to providing humanitarian support to Northern Indigenous communities. So that takes many forms. They do a lot around mattresses and school supplies and all kinds of medical supplies. They're a wonderful organization, so please check them out. Over the next couple of hours, we are going to intentionally create a space of safety. So that means that any sort of participation here, we want folks to feel safe. So we're going to try to reserve judgment, have curiosity as we're hearing one another's thoughts, questions, ideas, and experiences, and withhold any sort of judgment, recognizing that each one of us is on a learning journey. Nobody knows it all when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I've been in this field for about 20 years. I am constantly shocked at all that I do not know and all that I have to learn. So, this is very much a safe space for each of us to participate, learn, and grow. And so, with that, I encourage you, if you're comfortable, share your thoughts. I have a number of different discussion questions and case scenarios. Would love for you to wholeheartedly participate. You can do that by unmuting yourself. You can also share your thoughts and comments in the chat. Importantly, we do have a number of different accessibility features here in WebEx. So you can enable closed caption, but also you can send a direct message to myself or Aisha if there's anything that we can do to create more of an inclusive environment, an accessible environment for you all. And last but not least, present space. If you're able to mute distractions and just fully be here, I promise you will get much more from today's session. So that's the kind of environment I'm hoping we can create. Is there anything you folks would like to add to the list that would help you get the most of the session and feel as comfortable as possible participating? Please feel welcome to unmute yourself. Okay. So perhaps I'll ask either for a virtual show of hands or if you feel comfortable raising your hands, if you agree to creating a safe space, a brave space, and a present space. Lovely. Thank you. All right, we don't have to throw anybody out. That's great. I wasn't prepared to do that anyway. I've never had to. Hopefully, never will. Okay, great. So let's just dive right in with a question. What do you see here? Unmute yourself, put it in the chat. What is this? A horse. Thank you, Tina. A seal.
A seal.
Seal.
A rabbit.
Rabbit. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Here are some of the most common responses. I love the rabbit. I never hear rabbit. I feel like you must be very creative. That's amazing. We often hear donkey, we hear horse, we hear seal, fish, mermaid. Yeah, I love that. It's a seal. I love that conviction. There's so many different ways to interpret this ambiguous image. Well, this image actually comes from an experiment that was done back in 2008 by Cornell University. What they did was they took a group of participants and they broke them into two groups. Half of the time, participants saw a farm animal, like a horse, and they either gave them a jelly bean, which is what that is, or they gave them a lima bean. You can imagine most people wanted the jelly bean. The other half of participants saw a sea animal, like a seal, and again, they either gave them, when they saw a picture of the sea animal, a jelly bean or a lima bean. So they did that. And then what they did was they presented people with that ambiguous image and they asked them, what do you see here? Now, what do you think happened? For the people who saw a farm animal and received a jelly bean, what do you think they saw in that ambiguous image? What do you think? I promise it's not a trick question. Another farm animal. Exactly. Yes, wonderful. Thank you in the chat. That's great. 67% of people who saw images of the farm animal and were given the jelly bean saw a farm animal. They saw a donkey or a horse or maybe a rabbit. And what do you think happened with the sea animal when people received a jelly bean? Intuitively, yeah, 73% of people who saw a sea animal and were given a jelly bean saw a seal or an otter. What do you think? What can you take from this? Why might that be that when people are given an image and a jelly bean, they become more likely to see that image in an ambiguous drawing? Positive reinforcement, biased. Yeah, it's positive reinforcement. Would anybody like to say more about that? What does that mean, positive reinforcement?
A good association.
Yeah, exactly. It's a reward, a good association. You're all clever. Exactly. So, just that experience of being rewarded with a jelly bean when we saw an image was enough to shape how people interpreted that image. What we experience in the past, jelly bean or not, is powerful enough to shape the way that we perceive situations, people, our work in the future. And that's the crux of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how our backgrounds and our experiences can shape the way that we perceive one another and what that means, particularly in our role as counselors. I recognize there's also staff members, folks who care about the municipality of Oxford County. So, we're going to first talk about some key concepts that are core to conscious inclusion. We're going to talk a little bit more about how our backgrounds shape those perceptions as well as our experiences. And we'll talk about some ways in which each of us can become more consciously inclusive in our work lives and how we interact with one another as community members. So that's what you signed up for. Okay, so what is conscious inclusion? I heard from someone in the chat, I believe it was Jerry, that conscious inclusion is about naturally considering those around us and how we include others. Does anyone else have a take on what conscious inclusion means? And I'll give you a little hint. Look at the next slide. Here's an image of folks gathering around a table. Conscious inclusion is depicted here. Where might it be showing up? What might it mean?
It means treating everybody as equal. Doesn't matter what you see, that type of thing.
Yeah, wonderful. Everyone feeling welcome. Thank you, Crystal. So, everyone feeling as though they are respected, people feeling like they're valued, everyone feeling like they're welcome, regardless of differences. You all seem so kind, even though I'm in Niagara. You haven't kicked me out of the meeting yet. Yes, this is at the crux of it. People can be quite different from one another. And you'll see in this illustration, there's a range of visible differences. There's age ranges. There's a child in a high chair. There seems to be an older individual. There's a range of abilities and disabilities. For example, there's a person who uses a wheelchair. There's also different racial backgrounds or different skin colors, different gender identities, different religious artifacts. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we cannot even see at all in this image. We can't tell people's professional background or their educational background, their family status. We can't really tell what their personality might be. There's their sexual orientation. There's a lot that we cannot necessarily glean from the image, but guaranteed, there's a lot of differences around this table. And yet it seems like everyone's kind of getting on, right? And I see from Tina, purposely creating an environment where people are equal. Yeah, so equal respect, right? Equal dignity. Everyone's treated as though they matter. How can you tell what's going on here that would tell you that people might feel that sense of respect, welcoming, camaraderie? Well, no one's throwing food at each other, so that's always a good thing. They're sharing.
They're sharing food and cheersing each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's some things. Everyone seems engaged with someone else. No one feels like they're ostracized, sitting alone. People can be really different from each other and still connect meaningfully. That people feeling included is not contingent, it's not dependent on them being the same. People can have great conversations, find things in common, and find areas where they're different. Thank you, Crystal. Great. There's a variety of food. So conscious inclusion includes recognizing that not everybody who's coming for dinner is going to eat the same thing. You all recognize people have dietary restrictions and preferences. So, for example, at this dinner party, there's vegetarian food, gluten-free, kosher, dairy-free, halal, vegan. It's about making sure that you have a sense of what people want to eat, what their restrictions are, and that there's options for them. So that might mean that it's a potluck and people are invited to bring foods that they can eat or that others can eat. Or it might mean that the caterer has been asked to provide a variety of options. But the key point is that whoever's organizing took the time to find out what people need and then ensured that that was available. What else signals conscious inclusion to you here? It's a little less obvious, but look at the chairs.
Yeah, I was just say the chairs are all where people need them to be equal.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So imagine if everyone had the same chair. I don't know if you have kids. I have a 6-year-old and 8-year-old. They would be climbing on that table. They would be right in the center, grabbing those flowers. If they didn't have the chair at the right height, they would be climbing in order to reach what they need. So the high chair enables the child to access things at the same level as everybody else, right? Similarly, what do you notice about the person in a wheelchair, the wheelchair user? There's space for their chair too. This is not I don't know if you've seen high top tables that are often, at restaurants. If that were the case, the wheelchair user would not be able to be at the right height. So they ensured there's room around this table and that it's at the right height for a person using a wheelchair to be able to access the meal. So all of these things signal conscious inclusion. It's recognizing that different people have different needs, different backgrounds, creating an environment where people feel welcomed and heard, and that they're given the right access or the right chair or the right space so that they can fully participate in the meal, as our analogy goes. I'd love to just pause here and just see if there's any questions that are emerging or any reflections as you think about what conscious inclusion means. And I know it's dinner time and I'm showing you a dinner party, so my apologies.
I'm just sad there's no pets because our cats would be all over that table.
Oh,
They're included
right.
whether we want them or not. I'm just
I have a Springer Spaniel. He would be springing on that table. I totally get it. Are there any other reflections or questions about what these concepts mean? Reflections? Okay, I think you're getting it. So conscious inclusion it's really about being intentional. It's about deliberately considering how we can make space for people to be seen, heard, respected, to contribute, especially if they're folks who might be historically overlooked or systemically overlooked. We want everyone to feel included. Absolutely. Every single person should feel respected and included. And we know that sometimes there's people we don't think about. There's groups that we might overlook, that we might not consider, not because we're bad people, but sometimes because they might not be at the forefront of our minds. And so conscious inclusion is all about making sure that those groups are visible in our minds and that we're continuing to prioritize them alongside other groups that might more readily come to mind when we're making decisions.
So just to clarify, we should prioritize those groups.
Oh,
Make
yes.
them a priority. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely. So it's all about how do we make sure that everyone has, as we talked about, that equal respect, equal access, that any barriers are being removed so that all residents, all citizens, all staff members, all council members feel that sense that they have been considered and are prioritized, because it's not always a given, right? And many of you recognize this because, no surprise, inclusion is a core part of your strategic plan. And hopefully these are familiar documents to you all. I'm sure you all had a big part in crafting them. Your strategic plan documents make it very clear that you want to create a community where everyone belongs. In fact, you've talked a lot about your vision, working together for a healthy, vibrant, and sustainable future. Your values underpin that around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And specifically, pillar number 1 speaks to the value of having community health, safety, and well-being for the entirety of the municipality. Why is that so important? Why does it matter that people feel that they belong across Oxford County?
Well, I think it's a basic human want in life to feel like you're, especially with all the stuff going on in the world right now. We're pretty privileged and lucky to be able to, have the level we do, but not everybody is still have that even within our county. So I think if we think of ourselves in the mirror, we would all want that.
Yeah. That most of us want that sense of belonging, a part of a community, right? That we matter to the folks that are around us, our neighbors, our community members. What else? Thank you. Is it Bernia? I hope I'm saying your name correctly. When you belong, you are included. When you are included, you have a path out of isolation. Whoa, loneliness is not supportive of overall health and wellness. That's powerful. I'm just going to read it again. When you belong, you are included. When you are included, you have a path out of isolation. Loneliness is not supportive of overall health and wellness. Yeah. So when folks are not included, it can feel very isolating, very alienating. And we know that loneliness and isolation is one of the most dangerous factors to our mental health and to our physical health as well. So it's so important that none of us feels that sense of alienation or isolation, that we all feel as though we matter. What else? Why is community well-being so important to the municipality?
Well, we have a while. We can go into the social economics of it and our taxes and what that means that way. But there's real life consequences to that, not only to people's lives, but our services and how we spend our money, and things we like to spend it on rather than have to spend it on, right? So.
Yeah. So when we invest in community, when we care about well-being, when we care about people and their experiences and their outcomes, it makes for a much more productive municipality, doesn't it? Certainly when people feel that sense of mattering, we see the returns. We see that they're much more productive and engaged, much more likely to be contributing. There's all kinds of knock-on benefits when people feel that sense of inclusion. And so great to see that this is central to your strategic plan and the values that you bring forth. And so, yes, we must care about conscious inclusion for so many reasons. Obviously, it helps us towards our vision of creating that vibrant, municipality that centers well-being and health. And we also recognize that if we don't focus on conscious inclusion, that different people can experience different outcomes. So a little earlier, we talked about groups that might not always be at the forefront of decision making. This data that you see in front of you represents some of those groups. So this is data going back to 2024. And what it reports is the number of people who have experienced discrimination across Canada's workplaces. These are sobering data points. And I raise this not to depress anyone, but just to highlight the discrepancies and inequities that can often happen across a number of different communities. For example, 1 out of every 4 people with disabilities, which include non-visible disabilities, cognitive disabilities, learning disabilities, mental health challenges, have experienced discrimination. 30% of women, 30% of younger adults aged 18 to 34, who interestingly are some of the highest food bank users across our country right now. 36% of non-binary people. These are folks who do not identify as being male or female, but rather a fluid gender in between. 40% of Indigenous people, 40% of racialized people, or in other words, people of color is another term that's often used, and 50% of Black people across Canada. On top of that, 39% of the two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transitioning, queer, intersex, and asexual group, often referred to as the queer community, report experiencing violence or other forms of discrimination. And we've seen a 30% representation of the total number of complaints received by the Human Rights Commission in Canada between 2015 and 2020 that are related to race or religion, which is a 53% increase. And I imagine with everything going on in the world, that number is much higher today. Indigenous folks, 25% are living in poverty in Canada compared to 11% of non-Indigenous people. And 12% are unemployed compared to 8% of the non-Indigenous population. So again, the reason why we talk about this is just to remind us that while we have these aspirations around including everyone and everyone being treated with equal dignity and equal respect and have that sense of equal mattering, have equal well-being, it's not the case. That sometimes aspects of who we are or who we're perceived to be, our skin color, our religion, our indigeneity, can lead folks to treat us differently. And that different treatment can lead to all kinds of negative consequences that you'll see, of course, in housing, in healthcare, in education, in the criminal justice system. The list goes on and on and on. One further sobering data point is around where people experience discrimination. And I just took race as one example. And you'll see it's not just confined to workplaces, although certainly it happens at work. It also happens on the street, in communities, people just walking down the road, at school or university, in stores that might be being followed around or accused of stealing, in restaurants, on public transit, at airports. So this is just to say it's pervasive. It's not just a problem at school or a problem at work. Discrimination and oppression can happen across all aspects of Canada. Now, this isn't to say that other groups don't experience discrimination. They do, absolutely. Discrimination can happen to many different folks, but rather it's just to underscore that there are certain communities who've had disproportionate experiences over a significant amount of time. And it's really important that we recognize that when we strive to be consciously inclusive. I see a note here. We know that when youth are engaged in community, they are less likely to fall into substance use and misuse. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. Any other reactions, reflections, questions? Anything coming up for folks here? Okay. I know sometimes this can be, really hard for folks to wrap their minds around. And often it's because we come from a good place of not wanting people to be treated differently and to have different experiences. But I can tell you, as somebody who's worked inside of corporations for 20 years, I look at human resources processes and I look at outcomes. And I can tell you that when I look at, for example, performance ratings, how people get paid, I see these big discrepancies. I see that different groups get paid differently for the same work. Or I see that performance ratings are differently applied to different groups, even when the work quality is the same. And so often it's not conscious. It's not a manager saying, well, I really hate women. In fact, most managers will say, no, I have a daughter and I want to be equal. But unfortunately, without being conscious, sometimes we can see or evaluate folks from particular groups more positively than those from other groups. So it's not intentional a lot of the time, but rather it can be a product of learning unhelpful stereotypes that many of us have been raised with through media, through our upbringing, through exposure to societal messages. So
Or
it
do you know
really
if that?
does.
Sorry, just
Yeah,
a
go ahead,
question
Brian.
on that. Do you know if that unconscious bias is like that effect transfers uh like with the case in that one with race? Is it like a positive association like we saw this the you know I guess the mirror effect, I guess you does that transfer between groups? Like, so if you had like a racialized manager, is there a reverse effect there? Because I guess you go back to tribalism and stuff like that of just the
Mhm.
human brain, the way the human brain works. I just didn't know if that has been found or to try to learn more about that.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, that's such a great question because you're right. There has been so much research that shows that people across numerous groups gravitate towards people who are similar to themselves. Whether it's we have the same educational background, or we play the same sport, or we're from the same community, or we speak the same language, or we were born in the same country, the same generation, people tend to favor those who remind them of themselves or people that they know. So yes, we can and do gravitate towards similar others. However, disproportionately, folks who are from certain groups still hold quite a lot of power. And so when we look at, for example, who is represented as heads of corporations, represented in government, we still see that there's a number of groups that are more likely to be there rather than representing the demographics of the Canadian population at large. And so when we chat about similarity biases, it's so important we talk about power dynamics because certainly while any group could be liable to fall prey to similarity biases, the consequences are quite different for different groups. You know what I
No,
mean?
absolutely.
Um,
So the population,
yeah.
just the way the population traditionally was, that's the fault. That's the issue there is that you know uh, there is one group that's like not to, the white Anglo-Saxon whatever European settlers I guess were predominantly so that bias from that group is going to be more predominantly portrayed, right? So that's the hence why we need to not fall trap for that and be able to have the skills to look past that.
Exactly, exactly. And of course, we don't want to discriminate. So there's all that. We want to be fair people. And we know that when we include and we hear from and we listen to folks who disagree with us and who have different backgrounds and perspectives, there's all kinds of really good benefits. So you'll see here on this slide, teams, organizations that prioritize inclusion, that work at being inclusive and fair, they're more productive. Honestly, it's a lot of differences in terms of ideas that are being generated. People are much more likely to think outside the box and challenge one another, much less likely to fall prey to groupthink, which means they're higher performing, they're much more innovative and agile, more likely to be trusted by community members and to have a good reputation, and more likely to attract and retain talent. Because when you're able to demonstrate that, look, we're not trying to discriminate. We don't want to just listen to people who remind us of us. We're not just favoring the opinions that mirror or echo ours. People are much more likely to perceive you as somebody who can be trusted. So, lots of really good benefits to being inclusive. However, often challenging today at a time where many folks don't like to be challenged. So often we perceive that when folks agree with us, that's a great sign. However, I would argue that it's worrisome when people aren't willing to share with us when they disagree, because it means that we're not evolving our thinking and we're not identifying what we might be missing in order to make better decisions and to anticipate the needs of different community members who might not always have a voice at the table. So, really important that we continue to prioritize inclusion. Are there any other benefits or reasons why a focus on conscious inclusion is important other than what we've surfaced so far, or different perspectives, maybe a different angle, a contrary angle to what I've presented so far? Okay. Well, we're now going to shift to how to become more consciously inclusive. We've just talked a bit about what it is, why it's important, anchored in your vision, your values, your strategic plan, also some of what we know to be true in terms of how different groups experience discrimination within municipalities, within our communities. Now we're going to move over to what we can each do in order to become more inclusive. The first bit is just about understanding difference. So, folks, another fun activity for you. Let's imagine you're driving your vehicle and it breaks down. As luck would have it, you forgot your cell phone at home. You see each of these 4 vehicles nearby. They're equidistant, they're all within the same distance to you. Which one of these vehicles are you going to approach and why? So, for those who might not see the slides, we have a Prius on the top left-hand corner. Top right, we have a Ford pickup truck. Bottom left, we have a Toyota sedan. And then at the bottom right, we have a BMW SUV.
What am I doing with how many people?
Oh, you're by yourself. And you're going wherever it is you typically go. Prius, says Marcus.
And they're all
Would you
mine?
care to... your vehicle broke, so you have to approach which one of these vehicles. Yes, you are not rich and own 4 vehicles. Your vehicle broke. Marcus, would you mind sharing why you would go with the Prius? What was it about that Prius that stood out to you?
It won't be a surprise to the group in this, but I have a bias towards something that's energy efficient and environmentally friendly. And if I'm on my own, that's going to do the job. Everything else is superfluous.
All right.
Oh, I'm
So
going for that
environmentally
Camry.
friendly. Okay, tell me why the Camry?
Oh, because that thing is it was well engineered. It's going to last forever, and it's probably the oldest one there. So it's might as well keep it going, right? That's
Yeah. Did you work for Toyota?
nope.
just wondering if there's a positivity bias there. No, that's great. Thank you.
Old cheap
I'm seeing-
cars I like though. That's
I love it. So it's interesting to hear the lens, right, that people are applying to these different vehicles. I'm seeing here as well that Tina would do a Prius as well, likely based on who might be driving it and the color. So, Tina, you're an orange fan. Who might be driving this Prius, if you don't mind me asking? Who comes to mind?
Marcus.
If I would say the 4 of them, I would think the Prius would be a younger. Like if I'm looking at it bias wise, I'd say the Prius is a younger or female. The truck would be a man's vehicle. The Toyota at the bottom, somebody older, and the BMW, someone that's rich. That's the way I would partake that vehicle.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm seeing that Christy's saying Toyota, maybe because an older person might be driving and as a woman, I would feel more comfortable. Yeah. So you're thinking about your own gender identity, and you're also thinking about who might be driving this vehicle and who do I feel comfortable with? Jerry, you're saying if I needed my battery boosted or more likely to have tools, the truck. So we're picturing the truck might actually have some tools in there to help you get back on the road. Any other responses? Would anybody choose the BMW?
I would go to the vehicle, whoever's going to help me. I would go to the BMW. I would go to the person in the BMW because they're going to have a cell phone.
Okay. What makes you think they might have a cell phone, Rick?
Well, the perception of a person driving a BMW is going to have money. As somebody said earlier, is going to be rich. In most cases, the rich people have got the most up-to-date Apple iPhones. So, hey, let's get her done. But if I'm looking for help, any vehicle that anybody in any of these vehicles is willing to help, I'll go to any vehicle.
I'm going to burst your bubble right now. I drive an old BMW, and not rich or have a new phone. So, and I'm not going to let you call on it. So,
Brian,
so
you have
helpful.
2 phones. You have 2 phones, so you've got to have one with you at least most of the time.
Yeah, it's interesting though, Rick, that comment about I would go to anybody who's helpful. So there's I'm noticing a bit of a contrast here. For example, Christy was saying, you know, I might go to the Toyota because as a woman, you're thinking about maybe safety and which one feels the safest to you. Whereas what I'm hearing, Rick, is maybe that doesn't factor into your consideration. It's just whoever might help.
Absolutely, because you could go to the Prius and there could be a woman driving it, and the woman could go, "Hey, I'm a mechanic.
Mm.
Let me fix the problem for you." Or you could go to the guy in the Ford. Well, he has no idea. All he does is drive his truck. So it's ultimately, hey, whoever's willing to help, a
Yeah.
bear or a man.
Yeah, going back to that. But isn't it interesting just how seeing a make, a model, a color of a vehicle, we have all of these mental images that come up about who might be driving this vehicle. And we also have our own levels of comfort and maybe feelings of being attracted to or cautious of these vehicles. Why is that? Why is it that, you know, we might have those associations, or, you know, why might we be thinking about the Prius more likely to be a woman, or the Ford more likely to be somebody who can boost us, or the BMW with a cell phone? Where does all that come from?
Balance of probabilities.
Yeah. And why? Why is that?
Because our past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. So what's the right answer? I know it's a trick question.
There isn't.
Yeah, no, it's actually the BMW. No, I'm just joking. No, there's no right answer at all. And you know what's so interesting is depending on who I facilitate this activity to, I hear a totally different range of answers. So, you know, for example, when I'm here in Niagara, everyone drives a pickup truck. And so that is the vehicle. And in fact, there's very negative associations with this Prius. But yet, when I'm in downtown Toronto, the Prius and the BMW, well, they reign, you know? And when I'm speaking to executives, the BMW all the way. It's so interesting how we can take the exact same pictures, and yet the way that we respond as individuals and also collectively can be so different. And I love this, as Bernia, our past experiences that have been rewarded with red jelly beans. Well, we can just end the session right there. That's exactly it. But we don't always know that we've been rewarded with these red jelly beans, right? And so that red jelly bean might be that, you know, maybe one of your parents drove a vehicle that looks like that Toyota. And you like your parents, which is also a bonus. That's another red jelly bean. But having a positive association and a positive set of experiences creates a sense of comfort, of trust, of warmth in us that can cause us to make a decision like, I'm going to ride in that Toyota, or I'm going to go ask that Ford driver for their cell phone, or I'm not going to go to the BMW because you didn't say this, but I often hear they're going to be a snob and they're not going to help me. They're going to think they're better than me. So all of these things come up just by seeing a picture. So imagine what happens when we meet a person with so much more data in front of us. Our minds can create all kinds of stories without us even recognizing it. I'm just seeing a couple comments. Crystal, if I'm looking for help, I would not be looking at the vehicle. I'd be looking at the person driving. Who looks friendly? How do we know who's friendly? What do we look for? And this could be anyone, not just Crystal. A kind face. What does a kind face look like? Smiling, body language. What does the body language do?
Makes you feel comfortable to ask.
Yeah. What tells you that a person's body language is friendly?
If they're smiling.
They're smiling. Okay. A smile. Love that. I'm so glad I brushed my teeth before this session so I could smile for you all. But you know what's so interesting? So I facilitate a lot, and we have this video where, and this is what my TED Talk is about. We have people meet a candidate who's interviewing for a role. within their organization. And then we have them evaluate the candidate. But what folks don't know is that each of the different groups has a different candidate who says the same thing. So they all are actors and they have these scripts. And what's different is a lot of body language stuff. So one candidate who is a Chinese male looks away quite a lot when he's reflecting, doesn't maintain eye contact with the camera. Another candidate, very focused on eye contact. What do you think people make of that? What do you think people think about eye contact versus not?
It probably depends who you are.
Yeah.
Because this is, I don't enjoy direct eye contact, but
Yeah. So that same behavior for some can be seen as actually quite challenging, uncomfortable. For others, looking away can be seen as evasive, shady, while others see that eye contact, looking away, as a sign of respect. So the way we interpret smiling, many parts of the world, smiling too often is a sign that a person is dishonest and might not take themselves, seriously. In other parts of the world, Canada in particular, smiling a lot is a sign that you are warm and friendly. And so even the way we interpret body language is very much based on the red jelly bean that we received, which for many of us, might be the way in which our family raised us or the society community we grew up in. So it's not always perceived in the very same way. Crystal, thank you. Eye contact is important. It means they are listening and engaged. Sometimes it means people are focused, right? Or they have a neurodivergence, for example, in their processing. So it really comes down to what we perceive is shaped by what we experience. And we all experience very different things. Even though we might share a community or we might be a part of Oxford County, each one of you brings very different backgrounds from one another. And that's because you're people. So this is the social identity wheel. It was in the meeting invite today. If you'd like to see a bigger version that's not going to test your eyes as much as this one. And what it captures is some of the ways, not all of the ways, that people differ in Canada. There's many, many more things. For example, your professional background that are not captured here. Your veteran status is not captured here. But this captures some of it. So you'll see along the the outside of the circle, categories. So things like your citizenship. Are you a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or a temporary resident? Are you Indigenous? Your skin color, your gender, your sex, your sexuality, your disability or lack of disability, neurodiversity, mental health, language, your education, formal education, housing, and your wealth. So each of these different dimensions combine to make us different people. So you are more than one thing, right? So you are more than, for example, a person with a temporary disability. You might be a person with a temporary disability who is bilingual in French and English, who is renting your house, who is, let's say, a cisgender woman. So you can be lots of different things. And each of those different parts of you combine to make you an intersectional person. That is a big word, essentially complicated. That all it means is you have lots of different parts that combine to shape your experiences. So going back to the depressing stats that we looked at earlier, if you are a person with a disability and you also are Indigenous, you are going to experience the world differently than if you are an Indigenous person without a disability or a person with a disability who is not Indigenous. So parts of us can come together to impact those experiences and outcomes that we have. Masking means that sometimes people hide parts of who they are. They might downplay it, not talk about it because they perhaps don't feel safe, or they might want to fit in or feel accepted by others. So I'm noticing that in 2026, more people are hiding their disabilities and their sexual orientation at work, because they don't feel confident that they will not be discriminated against because of who they love or because of a disability that doesn't impact their performance. And tokenism is when a person feels that they are overly identified. So they become the representative of their community. For example, this happened to me recently. I was asked to serve on a board, and the person asking me to serve on the board said it was because they didn't have any women and they really wanted a woman. That is tokenism. Because essentially I am just being seen as a representative of the incredibly diverse and vast community of women, as opposed to being Michelle, someone who has 20 years in HR and, all these skill sets. So it's when a person feels singled out as opposed to understood for who they are and valued for who they are. So it's really important that we talk about all those things, because in your work, of course, the folks you engage with, the folks that you are advocating for, in communication with, making decisions about, are going to inhabit many of these different spaces. And sometimes those people might not feel comfortable identifying themselves to you or talking about their identity or background. Because it might be very sensitive or something that's private. They might not feel safe, because they might not want to be treated as a token. And yet it's still so important that when we're making decisions, we're still considering all of these different factors. What's coming up for you all when we think about the social identity wheel and how folks differ? Any questions or areas I can clarify?
Well, that nobody's the typical, I guess. Everybody's got spectrum on that wheel. And I guess,
Yeah.
does it really matter? Each one of these things could matter to somebody, but there's, when you're evaluating something, they probably don't really play into anything that's important, probably, but.
Yeah, each of these things will play into how we perceive the world, and kind of like those red jelly beans. So, just going back to the example of the car, being female was a part of how somebody, what shaped somebody to feel comfortable with one vehicle or over another. That doesn't mean every woman would feel that way, but it is one part of a person that could inform what decision they make about what vehicle they would approach, right? So each of these factors shapes us, but to different degrees. So we all have met folks who really, really identify by a particular part of their background. So, let's talk about, it could be, for example, somebody who with their wealth. So we've met folks whose background socioeconomically has really, really shaped who they are and what they value, right? Perhaps they were raised in a lower socioeconomic status background. They have been able to advance out of that. And because of that experience with poverty, they have a lot of empathy and a lot of perspective, right? That helps to shape, where they give back and the causes that they support, or just in general advocating for people who are less advantaged economically. So, but we've also met people where that's just not a part of what they talk about, their story, how they advocate. It's not a part of how they define themselves. So each of these things is very subjective. Each one of us can decide kind of how each of these parts define or do not define us and the way in which we see ourselves.
I can tell you that municipal government as a case study would be very interesting for politics in general, because the way that the things that bring people into it, and the reasons for it, they this wheel and others, that it's a very interesting that everybody approaches it differently with a very diverse story background about what brings them into want to serve. So it's interesting that way of again, of the whole society, but it's maybe a little bit highlighted in community service and politics, I guess.
That would be a fascinating discussion to have, bringing the wheel and talking about kind of what precipitated the interest in politics. Other questions, reflections, points of clarification?
Michelle, Bob
Oh,
has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
Bob says, how can we connect with such diversity without offending, excluding other identities?
Oh, Bob, good question. We're going to chat a little bit about this a little bit later on too. It's so often, let me back up. When I was raised, the advice my mom and dad gave me when I saw a person with a disability, an obvious disability, for example, somebody with a mobility device or a seeing eye dog, for example, a guide dog, they would say, don't look, don't stare, don't notice. Michelle, look away, right? That was the advice, is to be inclusive, to be respectful, is not to notice and not to engage, because we don't want people to feel different. We don't want them to feel uncomfortable. What we've learned over the past decade is, in fact, that is problematic. That avoiding people, not engaging with people creates a situation, to go back to what one of our colleagues said, where people feel quite isolated and quite lonely. So we have to engage. And just like that dinner party, doing that means we're going to make mistakes. I hate to tell you, it's inevitable, because anytime you're engaging with somebody who's different from you, there's probably things you don't know. You might not know about Ramadan or Lunar New Year, right? But you're willing to learn because you're curious. And so it takes trust and some humility to say, I might not get it right. I'm really curious. I want to learn more about, let's say, the queer community. Can I even say queer? Is that okay? Is there a better term that I can use? Or I'm learning about what it might be like to be a temporary resident. In Niagara, we have a lot of refugees. What terms can I use? How can I best address you? What ways in which, how can I communicate best with you? It's seeking to understand and not presuming, right, that you have all the answers. It's also important that we try to do our own research too. So not putting all the work on the person who might represent a different community to tell us everything, but us just going away and doing a little Google search or asking other people who are in our trusted network around, I want to be most inclusive. I'm learning about, the Muslim faith. What are some things that I should know as I'm thinking about engaging with this community? So lots of learning, Bob. So it's always vulnerable. However, I would say that if you are really trying, you probably are going to make a mistake here and there. It's just the case, right? Our language is always evolving. Our knowledge of different people is evolving. Canadian demographics are evolving. We're just changing all the time. So you're not always going to get it right. It's a matter of just learning and moving forward. And I have a little framework later to show you how to do that as well.
I would
Thank you for
also
your
like
question.
to Thank you, Michelle. I would like to mention over here, since it's over there on the wheel, that it says citizenship. That's also a huge, huge part, since I'm an immigrant as well. Over here, I would like to mention and take this platform as an opportunity to mention that people with temporary resident status do face a lot of problem, because in job descriptions, it's always mentioned that they would give priority to permanent residents and Canadian citizens. So I thought maybe this is something, that's how one also get excluded. And it's hard for temporary residents to find jobs, because it's already stated there that the priority would be given to other groups. So yeah, just wanted to mention that over here too. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Absolutely bang on. Any other questions? Okay, well, this is a great time to pull out the PDF that was in the invite for today's meeting. Would love for your reflection. You don't have to participate. You don't have to share anything out loud if you don't want to, but just a moment for you to reflect what parts of your own identity, and again, it could be multiple different parts, most strongly shape how you see issues, priorities, or decisions that affect Oxford County. So for example, I'm a parent. I have 2 little kids. So if I were in your shoes, I'd probably be thinking a lot about spaces to bring my kids, splash pads and parks and trails. And I would be thinking a lot about spaces that would allow me to have places to engage my kids. That's just a part of my identity. What parts of your identity might shape your view? And if you'd like to share, you're welcome to. And if not, that's okay too. We can just reflect for a couple moments. It's a very complex question, Marcus. You're right. Yeah. Giving you like 2 minutes is not very fair. But the idea is just to start to think about, just like that exercise with the seal or the rabbit or the donkey or the horse. Life is kind of that, right? That we project our own experiences and what we've been rewarded for onto everything. And so it's going to shape what we pay attention to, who we listen to, what we interpret. Jerry, our past history, our friend groups, work experiences, those that reach out to us often as politicians. Yeah. And those who reach out often to us as politicians, when we hear certain voices, we might be more inclined to listen because they're more prevalent, they're more prominent, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those voices are the most representative or that those issues are the most urgent, right? That sometimes the loudest voice is not always the voice we need to be listening to. And that can be hard. As a parent, often it's the
Except
kid
when
who's
I'm
screaming
talking.
for me. Yeah, exactly. Except for when Brian's talking. And then in which case, yes.
I
But it's
think
important.
something that I became aware of, I think only as I got older, was I'm a first generation Canadian, but I think I didn't really always see myself as like a child of immigrants because like white dude, but I think as I get older and I've had conversations with a lot more people with different backgrounds, I find it strange. I have found it strange that a lot of the time I found myself really identifying with people who I did not previously think I would identify with. And probably they didn't think they would with me because they were racialized or something in some way that I wasn't. And yet, when we talked, I realized you're the experiences you're describing, the things that, this question says, shape how you see issues, are the same as mine. And I think in hindsight, I realized that I grew up in a way that, as a kid, you just think that's how you grow up. But I realized I grew up as a first generation Canadian, as a child of immigrants, and all the baggage, the cultural things, the positive minuses that go with that. So I think to me that, as I have done this for a while now, is one of the things that I probably didn't realize when I started, but I do realize now.
There's so much wisdom in that, recognizing that you as a second generation Canadian have so much in common with others who might also be second generation Canadians whose families are from totally opposite sides of the world than you. But there's a tie that binds there. I really resonate with that. There's differences, of course, and there's things there that have informed the way you think and how you live, and whether you have a sock with tons of cash in it underneath your mattress. I'm just joking. But, there's things, right? Christy says work, 50 plus community, friends, 40 to 60-year-old colleagues all over, parents, 20 to 30s. Yeah. So all of these different generations, right? Generations shape how we make decisions. Absolutely. Anything else coming up for you all? Okay. So keep on exploring that. It's fascinating. I think just introspecting around what are some of those parts of me and my identity that might be influencing the way I see things, because that helps you to figure out where you might benefit from bringing in a different perspective. Maybe it's a perspective of someone else around the table, but maybe it's somebody in community that you can engage with. So the way that we promote inclusion First of all, is by understanding what is inclusion. We talked a bit about mattering and we talked a bit about people feeling respected. But when you boil it down, a person really feels both of those things when they feel that they can be unique and they belong. So, uniqueness means you can be who you are. You don't have to try to hide. You don't have to try to change yourself to fit in or to mirror everybody else. You can bring yourself, of course, with the parameters of you have to be, professional and respectful. You can't be swearing all the time, of course, but that sense of you can be you with all of your values, your cultural background, your history, how those different parts of you, and you can not fit in, sorry, you can belong. So that means we're going to listen to you, your voice is going to matter, we're going to treat you with equal respect, we're going to care about ensuring that you feel welcomed here. What happens if we have one without the other? So imagine that people in your municipality felt that they could be unique, different, but that they didn't belong. What would happen?
Can you say that once more for me?
Here's a tongue twister. What would happen if people felt that they could be unique or different, but that they could not belong? So you can be you, but you're not a part of the group.
Isolation, unwelcomed.
Yeah. Going back to what we said earlier, that isolation, you would feel unwelcome. And then how do you think folks would feel, let's say citizens who felt that, you can speak your language, celebrate your traditions, go to your places of worship, all of the things that make you unique, but you're never really welcome. You're never really going to be a part of this community. What might happen?
There
Oh,
is no
that's my
sense of belonging, I guess, then.
Yeah. And Krista says they might move. Yeah, absolutely. Or continue to isolate. And that's where we see the communities become very insular, right? Where community members engage, but they might not feel safe or that sense of belonging to move beyond that community. So they might not engage as much externally. They could lose their uniqueness or mask what they can. Yeah. And that really happens on the inverse. So when a person feels that they belong, so welcome to Oxford County, you belong here, you matter here, but you can't really be yourself. You got to hide it. You can't talk about it. You can't practice that religion. You can't, honor that celebration. How might that person feel? What might they experience? I'm just hearing you would end up looking for belonging and connection with the wrong people. I'm hearing my teenage self in this thought. I hear you on that. Yeah. And this one reminds me of my teenage self too. That sense of you can't be yourself, but you can belong. Do you have a word for that? I might have said that in verse. You can belong, but you can't be yourself. Loss of self. Yeah. It's conformity. Essentially, it's conformity. So what we're saying is people can join, but they got to change who they are. And we maybe have worked for companies in the past that have been like that, where you can work here, but you have to dress a certain way, you have to talk a certain way, you have to carry yourself a certain way. And nothing kills morale and engagement faster than telling people they have to be a cookie cutter of someone else. It's like going to high school. Absolutely, Tina. That was my experience too. So we have to have both. To get back to your vision of having healthy, vibrant communities, caring about well-being of your citizens, we have to both celebrate uniqueness, folks are different, and create that sense of belonging and community for people. And it seems like that's really important to you all.
Just
There's
a question on
Brian.
that.
Mhm.
When it comes to certain areas, like if and there's like, and I get where we're coming from, but if we're in a setting like a doctor's office or something like that, there's that cultural perception of how people should act and behave in there, and so if I go to a professional and they're, they're swearing, they're dressed up, that's culturally perceived as that, it can be seen as a negative. Whether they're competent or not in different settings. If you're not talking the same language, and I don't mean like English or something, but like the vernacular of the profession or what you're doing, there could be created a lack of trust or perceived as competence. So it's I guess we go back to where we are as humans, and we go, okay, this person speaks the same language, and they have, the Southern Ontario vernacular or the Newfoundland vernacular, so I can connect with them. So there is that thing of belongingness that creates. It's a hard one because you want to. That is the unconscious bias, I guess, but there are certain circumstances where it can be seen as being detrimental not to do that, and for a reason of I want to be belonging, but if a doctor is saying that they don't, they're using slang terms and stuff and not coming across as professional, that's probably going to stoke fear more than anything.
Totally. I'm so glad you raised this, Brian, because one of the reasons we've seen such backlash against my profession, against diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been misunderstanding on a lot of different things. But one of them is this belief that anything goes, right? If people can belong, then we're throwing standards out the window. Like, just come as you are. If you want to show up and, in your ripped jeans and swear and treat people with disrespect, that's okay, because that's your authentic self. It's not. That's not okay. I mean, I love ripped jeans, but if my doctor showed up to do surgery in ripped jeans, I might be a little concerned. So the idea is just getting really clear on, to belong in a profession, in a particular workplace, there are standards, right? So we expect people to demonstrate, respect for others, to dress in a way that conveys a sense of, professionalism, or not even that. I mean, if in those professions, we expect you to wear medical garb because of sanitary and health reasons, because it helps people to feel more trusting. It helps them to identify who's medical staff. All of those things, you can still have that clarity around what's expected and allow room for some difference. So what that means might be, okay, you as counselors, one of the expectations is that you are going to surface risks that face your community. You're going to talk honestly and forthrightly about where there might be a risk that could impact the well-being and the vitality of the community. That's a criteria. The way you do that is open to different styles. Some of you might be very direct. You just, this is what the risk is. Here's what I advise. Here are the consequences. Others of you might come about it in ways that are much more indirect, maybe more relational. Maybe you have a conversation individually with someone first, surface the idea, talk about how you're going to bring it to council. There's lots of different ways that people can bring their individuality without us throwing kind of expectations and standards out the window. It's really important that we just get clear on what matters and what really doesn't. Someone's accent doesn't matter. Their ability to, do, let's say, project management within the organization and keep time scales and project plans in line, important. I hope that helped.
Oh no, I agree with you. I'm sorry, I'm usually sometimes not very clear in my thoughts. So that's exactly what I was talking about. Is that there's things that matter, and there's it's like, again, exactly. It's not just everything goes, because you do hear that on the on some sides of the argument is just, well, there'd be chaos, right?
Exactly.
And I don't. That's not what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. So we still have standards, but people, when people are clear on what matters, then they understand, right, how to operate within that. But of course, it's getting clear on, we're not going to, hold your gender identity or your sexual orientation. All of those things should not be held against you. Absolutely. So to create that inclusive environment, there's many different actions we can take. And these are from an incredible author and thought leader called Karen Catlin. She has a newsletter called Better Allies or Ally Actions. And she has a great book, which I've sourced there at the bottom. And I'll share these slides with you all. She captures the different roles a person can play in order to be an ally. And an ally is someone who intentionally creates inclusive opportunities, tries to create a sense that people are heard, that they matter, and they stand in solidarity with folks so that people are not navigating things alone. One of the ways that Karen talks about doing this is by sponsoring. So this might be someone, for example, around a boardroom table who boosts the visibility of another person. So for example, I'd like to share with you an up and comer in our community who I really think is helping us to, come up with new events and programs that are going to help this community, talking about their impact, recommending them to be a part of committees or projects, shares their career aspirations or their goals. So the sponsor is all about making sure other people are aware of these folks. Sponsors have done so much for me in my career. I've had a number of senior people who've opened doors for me just by talking me up, which then meant I had introductions and opportunities and meetings. And that was so critical for me growing my own career. Championing. These folks are ones who take a back seat. So for example, you might be asked to speak on a panel and you might recognize that other people aren't being given opportunities who have great experiences. They've got a lot of thought leadership to offer, a lot of wisdom. So you might actually advocate for them to be represented. Like, hey, I get a lot of this. I really think that this individual who might be from a younger generation or from a different group who's very rarely profiled, I think that this person would really benefit from this opportunity. And others benefit because they get to hear from someone they might not typically hear from, right? So it expands their perspective and their purview. An amplifier amplifies voices. So that's exactly what it sounds like. This is somebody who gives credit to others. And we all know that person where someone might have raised an idea and the other person will come back to it and say, I just want to take a moment and thank Tina for that idea. Or as Tina said earlier in today's session, so it's making sure that people are aware of how other people are contributing. They reinforce points and they give a platform. So it could be, for example, that they open up an opportunity for someone to speak at a meeting or write on a blog or be featured in a newspaper article on a particular issue. So it's all about getting their voice and their perspective out there. You're all very familiar with advocating as well. That's somebody who builds support. So they give information, here's something that's going on that might be relevant to you in your career goals, makes introductions. You might not know this person who could really help open doors for you. They collaborate. So, there might be something a person's working on and they could use a thought partner, someone to work through the idea with them. And then, of course, gives them credit. So when something's accomplished, making sure that that person is recognized for their contributions. Upstanders are people who challenge inequity. This is admittedly the one that most people are terrified by. And it's all about addressing bias. So if something is said, kind of going back to a question earlier, if someone's offended, an upstander can help to pause and bring things back to a place where folks feel respected or give the guidance to help a person course correct their behavior. Sometimes it's out loud in front of others. Sometimes it's behind the scenes. It really depends on the particular situation. But the idea here is that we don't just leave it to people to have to defend themselves when they're experiencing discrimination or harm, that as allies, we can step in and say, wait a minute, we don't use that term anymore, for example. And the last one is actively listening. This is somebody who just creates a safe space. So it's about believing other people's experiences, even if you haven't experienced it firsthand, even if it's something that's, was not intentional. They validate and they hold space. So this sounds like it's, for example, from what you're telling me, it sounds like you felt like you were not heard in that meeting. It sounds like you felt that that person was not considering your point of view. So playing back to people what they've shared and believing and validating those experiences. Is there a role here, as you're looking at these 6 different ways of being an ally, that you find yourself gravitating toward? Maybe it's the style that you most, or the action you most often play, or that feels most aligned with your own skill set, your own style. Which one of these are you most likely to play? Four, but you'd like to work more on 5. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I imagine that a lot of you do 4. And 5 is uncomfortable because we often feel like we have to be confrontational, but we'll talk in a moment about how you can do it without being confrontational. 4, 3, and 4 with a desire to improve 1. Yes, so sponsoring, it's crucial. We all need sponsors. 4, yes, excellent. Yeah, so that's great. And honestly, in most corporations I work with, people struggle with number 4. It's just not something that comes naturally to everyone. And so, you're all very well positioned to use that skill set you have to help people feel like they're not alone, and to create that inclusion. So going back over here, oh, by the way, any questions on the allyship actions? We're going to dive a little bit deeper into number 5 in a moment, because it's always the one that gives people an allergic reaction. The areas I can clarify. So this is a bit of a cheat sheet. When you find yourself thinking about, okay, how do I show up more how do I become more consciously inclusive? You can come back to this. These are some of the ways that you can do that. Active listening, it doesn't always feel like a big thing, but it really is. You just, having a moment to sit with somebody and, hold space for them to tell you what they're going through is profound, right? It helps you to advocate because you're seeking to understand, but it's also so powerful for the person to be able to take something and share it with somebody so that they're no longer alone with it. So that's really powerful as well.
Thanks, Michelle. And I also feel like 6, active listening is the thing that basically initiates every other thing. Once you understand somebody, you listen to them, you try to understand them, where they're coming from, why they're saying what they're saying, what are their experience, where is it stemming from, then you can definitely lead up to others. But I feel like personally for me, active listening is the beginning, the very initiative that I would take, and I usually do, to step up to the others. So for me, the 6 would be 1.
Yeah. And like what
First
Marcus
step.
was sharing, I love that. Thank you so much, Aisha. And like what Marcus was saying, when we actively listen, we actually see ourselves in other people to some extent. Of course they're different, but you might think, oh, well, my family immigrated from Italy. That person's family immigrated from Pakistan. We have nothing in common. And then you sit down together and you have a conversation and you realize there are some similarities. It might have looked different, but we all know what it feels like to be, the two of us know what it feels like to be a second generation Canadian, and some of the differences, bringing a lunch to school that other people are like, what is that? And why do you have eel in your lunchbox? So, it just takes that intention to sit down and to hear people in order to catalyze the rest of these actions. So Aisha, you hit it on the nail on the head there. So when it comes to being an upstander, many of us think we have to shut something down really fast. We have to say something to stop a behavior, to stop a comment. And that can be true. We can say a statement like, that's not cool, or I don't appreciate that. However, often one of the best ways, not only for yourself and the person who has said something or done something offensive, to just gain some equilibrium and pause, but also to bring people's defenses down, is to ask a question. Just ask a question. So there's lots of questions you can ask, like, what's wrong with you? And didn't your parents raise you better than that? I'm just joking. But you can ask questions like, what did you mean when you said this? So, for example, oh, I guess girls are good at math. I don't know, that's silly, but oh, okay. What did you mean when you said that girls were good at math? Just pause, right? Just what did you mean? Often a person in that moment will reflect and realize, oh, maybe that came out not how I wanted it to. Maybe I have a bias here. Maybe there's something I don't know. But it just gives them that chance to introspect and then to come back. They might come back and be like, oh, yeah, no, I meant that because girls aren't good at math, in which case you're having a different conversation. But a lot of the times it's, oh, actually, you can also ask something like, what's your intention? So, I'm interpreting it as this. What was your intention when you made that comment? So just seeking to understand. My favorite, based on what? So that person lacks leadership presence. He's not trustworthy. That person, I don't know, that person seems sketchy. Or even on the flip side, something positive, like that person seems trustworthy or credible. Based on what? Like, what's the evidence actually to support that? It helps us to unpack what's leading to a person to make a conclusion so that they're not just running on assumptions or stereotypes. Is that the only conclusion? What's a different interpretation? What's another angle that we can see this from? Who might have a different perspective? All of these kinds of questions, and you can pick and create whichever one works best for you. It's a way of just pausing the conversation and helping to bring us back to a place where we can unpack and explore, hold these assumptions and comments up to the light and see them for what they really are, which a lot of the times is putting our foot in our mouth, saying the wrong thing. There might be a learning there. Sometimes a person really doesn't know. And so we might just want to advise or reframe. So a person might use an outdated term. This happens a lot. It could be a term to refer to a particular community or group. We can all think about words that we used to use when we were kids that we now know we should not use, right? Because we know they harm people. The best thing there is just to advise and reframe. So, you know what? One of the things I've learned is that a more inclusive word for that is this. Example, my husband recently, he was talking about handicapped parking. I said to him, we no longer use that word. In fact, we say accessible parking. This is an accessible parking space. He did not mean to offend folks with disabilities. In fact, my father's in a wheelchair, but he didn't recognize that his language was not up to date. So just this is what we use now, and this is what I've learned. It's important to do that with humility and without judgment, because that gets us to a place where people are more likely to listen. Also, as we've talked about earlier, we might receive someone raising a flag. And by the way, we use flags so that it becomes a tool as opposed to a personal attack. So rather than someone saying like, you've done something wrong, it's, I just want to raise a purple flag. It just becomes this thing that is around our meetings. You might actually have one in council meetings that you can refer to anytime there's an opportunity to pause and just address something that's been said that might be a bias, for example. So when a person raises a flag to you, the best thing to do is just to acknowledge it. I recognize that what I said there was offensive, or thank you for bringing that to my attention, or I understand now that I was using an incorrect term. If you're not sure, and that's okay, just ask some questions. So can you tell me a bit more around where I went wrong? Or what would a better word have been used that I could have used there? Just, it's okay to ask those questions so that you can better understand. If the person isn't okay with sharing that with you, feel free to go and ask someone else or to do your own research. So a person, for example, might be quite heightened if they've been targeted. It's probably not okay if they've been the target of a particular word to have to explain to you why that word is wrong. But you might choose to go and do some research or talk to somebody that you trust who can help shed light on why that word or phrase or whatever was said is not appropriate. But it's important to do that work. And then, of course, commit to doing better. When we know better, we do better, right? We're all going to make mistakes. We all do. I do. But it's about what we do with it, right? We just continue to learn and evolve because we're people, and people are not perfect. So that's raising purple flags. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on if this might be something that could be useful for you all from time to time when you encounter a learning opportunity when it comes to people and inclusion. What do you think? Would you raise the purple flag? Or if not, what could be used instead? Yeah, the seek clarity point. Yeah. And, assuming positive intent is always a good thing. So, people say stuff all the time. I just assume positive intent. They didn't know when they said that, perhaps they were insulting me or what have you. It often leads you to respond with much more compassion and humility than, getting on the defensive as well. So just seeking clarity, asking an open question can be really helpful. So that's one of the tools that we'll leave you with today around raising purple flags. How would we do it? Let's practice. A colleague tells you that you've continuously interrupted them in a meeting. How would you respond? Thank you, Bob and Bernia, in the comment. That's great. So if someone raises a purple flag on you and says, you keep on interrupting me in a meeting.
That's probably true.
Yeah. So I'm hearing you're acknowledging it, right? Brian's like, yes, I acknowledge that I probably did interrupt you. And then what?
It's something I'm working on, but I'm not very good at.
Yeah. So maybe the seeking clarity there is, what can I do to make sure that you have space to speak in meetings? So it could be that, for example, the person says, I want you to just wait 3 seconds after I've shared a comment before you chime in, because I still might be continuing my thought. There might be something there, but seeking clarity on, okay, how can I do better? What would be helpful can give you a lens on what you can do to course correct. Okay, you overhear one person tell another that they speak great English. Can anyone explain why this is problematic? You speak great English.
I feel like it brings out us versus them idea that I don't really like. You're appreciating somebody. It's like, okay, so you've adapted and you're good at it. So yeah, I would not like that.
Yeah, it's a negative compliment. Bernia, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, you know, sometimes people target these comments at folks that they think are so different from them. They're so surprised that a person is as articulate or as fluent in English. For example, I know many second generation Canadians who received this comment even though they were born in Canada. I've never been told I speak great English, ever. And that's because of the color of my skin. So while someone might intend that to be a compliment, often it shows you that there's a stereotype, a bias, an assumption that's being made. You weren't born in Canada. You're not as fluent. Sometimes even you're not as intelligent, which is ridiculous. But often there's a bias. So what can you say? Thank you. Assuming English isn't their first language. Thank you, Jerry. What can you say if someone says that? Let's say if you sought clarity in that moment, what question could you ask?
Why would you ask that question of that person?
You could totally go there. I find why questions, though, get people's backs up so fast. So what I would just say, Brian, is you could say a what question. So what made you ask that question? As opposed to why. These tactics work well on kids also. And spouses. Yeah, so what led you to ask that question? Yeah, what did you mean? You speak great English. What did you intend there? Were you intending a compliment? If so, it didn't land as a compliment. So all these questions. Another, at an event, a community member uses a derogatory term to refer to someone who is gay. What do you say?
Why do you think that's okay?
Oh, another why question.
Yeah, so think what? What made you think that was okay?
Yeah, yeah, it could be like, what was your intention there? Sometimes I'll just say, you know, what do you want me to take from that? What are you trying to get at here? And so sometimes people will say, oh, I actually thought that was the right word to use. And sometimes people will say like, no, this is what I meant, in which case, you can engage if you feel safe to, with, actually that that language is quite disrespectful. And that's not the kind of language we use here, but asking a question can at least help you to figure out where to go next. Okay, we were going to have a 5-minute break, but we're running a little bit behind. So I'll just move us forward, if that's okay. If anyone needs a quick break, totally understand. Feel welcome to just go ahead and do that and then come back when you are ready. The third bit and the final bit is about extending access. So we need to understand that people have differences, that nobody is the same. We're all quite unique, and our backgrounds shape the way we interact, the way we perceive one another, the kinds of treatment that we receive. We have to be intentional about being inclusive. We can do that by being allies. We can do that by raising purple flags and by extending access. And you all know all about this. On the slide in front of you, you have some bikes. The first level depicts equality on bikes, and the second level depicts equity. How would you distinguish, or how would you differentiate them? What's the difference between these two?
Top, the bike doesn't change.
Yeah.
Second one, the bike does change.
Exactly. So equality is everybody gets the same bike, regardless of whether you're a kid who needs a smaller bike or a taller adult or a person using a wheelchair. Everybody here gets the same bike. And really, out of those 4 people, it looks like only one person fits, right? I'm seeing some comments. Bernia, equality is this exact same standard for everybody. Equity is the right modification for each person. Excellent. Tina says people get what they need to be successful. It isn't the same. And Jerry says the same thing. They should have what they need. Yeah. Equity is another reason why people hate my field. They don't understand what equity means. Equity is just about making sure people have the right bike. They have the right support. They have the right thing that they need in order to move forward. So in the municipality, it might not be a bike, but it might be, for example, do people have the right ways to engage with you all? Do they have, for example, if people with disabilities have a harder time coming to meetings or through any of your consultation sessions, are there ways that their perspectives and voices can be heard? So it's just about asking, based on that identity wheel, what are some of the different needs that people might have in this community? And what can we do to help remove any of those barriers? So there we go. It's about taking stock of these differences and asking ourselves some questions. One question is, who might experience this decision differently? So the decisions we make have different consequences and different impacts on different groups. Take, for example, a fictional example, and that's why I put imagine on all of these, because none of these are real. I've just made all of this stuff up. So let's just imagine that council is considering a proposal to move an employment support office from a downtown location to a newer municipal building at the edge of town that's not currently accessible by public transportation. What communities do you think that decision could negatively impact? Because equality is, it's the same location for everybody, right? Everybody has access to it. But equity is saying, people might have different barriers.
The people who don't drive like me. I don't drive.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who don't drive for lots of reasons. Seniors. Thank you, Bernia. Lower income communities, individuals with physical disabilities.
The
Who
business
else?
who were relying on those customers prior.
Yeah. There's all those businesses, right? That were counting on those folks to be downtown. Who else? Caretakers, for example. It could be that people, oh, not caretakers, no, people, single parents or parents with one vehicle, for example, families with one vehicle. Youth, there's people who are young and they don't have cars, but they need to get to this location. Wonderful. Yeah, there's lots of different communities. So it's not about shaming and saying, how dare we? It's rather just getting curious to say, there's this decision. Let's look at the wheel and ask ourselves, who might get impacted by this? And what is it that we can do to ensure that they have access? Okay. The second question we can ask is, how easy is it or hard is it for residents to participate in the decisions that affect them? This is all about making participation easier for people. So another imagine that council is considering a proposal to build a waterfront trail around a stretch of river that has historical significance to a nearby Indigenous community. No representatives from the Indigenous community attend the municipality's public consultation process. What do you do? How should you proceed? Got to make this decision, but nobody has come to the consultation.
Reach out to them.
Why is that important?
Because we're forcing them to use our systems and maybe they don't want to participate in that. We should be treating them as equals, and part of that is talking to your neighbors and getting them treating on equal terms.
Yeah, and equal, equal respect, but the way that we do it might be different. So equity in this particular scenario might be a direct reach out. It might be, we'll come to you. We would like to hear from you. And so we want to know what's the best way that we can do that. You can contact the First Nations community. You should reach out, go to them instead of waiting for them to come to you. Reach out to the Indigenous community directly, nation to nation discussion. Great. So you all understand this. Just because somebody's not represented in the room, they haven't come to the consultation, doesn't mean that they don't care. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be consulted with. It just might mean that there's a barrier there. There's an equity barrier that we might need to overcome. And a solution could be asking the question, how do I best engage with you here? What's the best path forward? Okay, when you think about other perspectives that might be missing around the decision-making table, where might there be some areas where we might not have the perspectives around the table? And what are some ways that we can intentionally seek them out before deciding? Yeah, thank you, Bernie. Indigenous communities value relationship building and knowledge sharing. Yeah, different ways, right? As we talked earlier about, a smile is not a smile, right? We interpret things differently. Building relationships looks different. It has different, it requires different effort in certain communities, including Indigenous communities. We really have to take that time and build that trust, earn that trust back. What are some ways that you can bring those different perspectives in when you're making those decisions?
You have to make sure you got proper communication.
Yeah, how do you do that?
Build relationships prior.
Yeah. Any other ways?
Through one-on-one or town hall type meetings.
Great. And one-on-ones are great too, because there might be things people don't want to surface in public that they might be more likely to share with you individually. Tina says, I think it's important that when we make decisions, we need to consider the perspectives that we may not have heard from and reach out to those individuals. Yeah, and have conversations. So let's say, you're hearing a lot from Gen X, but you haven't heard a whole lot from older generations or younger generations. That might be a flag. I need to go and consult with this group. And so you can ask yourself, where might I find them? Maybe it's I invite them to come where I'm at, but there might be groups, gatherings, forums where folks might be, and that you could drop in and be a part of those communities and those discussions. So it could be, for example, that you're working with community organizations or advocacy groups, holding listening sessions. We've talked about one-to-ones, site visits, attending community events is a brilliant way of hearing perspectives. Many of these things you do know, but it's just being really intentional about that. Number 3 is ensure that all voices are heard. And this can be hard, right? Because, gosh, there's a lot of perspectives. And, you want to ensure that you're hearing folks, that you're including people's perspectives. And of course, you have to make sure that you're moving forward with, some degree of agility. So curious, imagine you're at a committee discussion and 2 counselors are dominating the conversation and everybody else remains quiet. The decision quickly moves towards a vote. What can you do in that moment to make that decision and discussion more inclusive? How can you ensure that everybody's voice is heard? You need to make a decision, but it seems like 2 people are dominating. I know this has never happened to you.
You can go around and ask each individual counselor their opinion or if they have any comments to make.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah. Tina says the same. Ask others for their contribution. What else? What if some people, not everybody can think on the spot, come up with immediate, responses? Is there anything you can do to create more space for people to participate without that direct impetus to share right in the moment? Maybe you come back to it. Maybe you park the decision, give it 10 minutes, give it some reflection. Maybe it's something that comes back to at the next meeting. But sometimes people just need time to think, to gather their perspectives, to do more research before they can weigh in. Thank you, Bernia. Ask for written submissions after the meeting. Invite connection and conversation. Written submissions, that's a great one. Not everybody likes to participate by voice. And we're seeing that, today. Great contributions on the chat, great contributions by voice, by video. People have different styles and different preferences. Imagine that council is discussing changes to customer service hours at municipal facilities. Frontline staff has indicated that some residents, including newcomers and people with disabilities, often need additional time and support when accessing services. How do you ensure that decision is inclusive? What do you think?
Not a one-size-fits-all model.
Yeah, so what could a not one-size-fits-all model, what could that look like?
You can ask the public for input, comments, suggestions, anything to that effect. Whether you have that as a written sheet that people could fill out, or whether it's through inviting comments through email back to the team leaders.
Excellent. So you could open it up for people to share their input. You could do that in a targeted way as well. So again, equity, not all the same. If you know that this might disproportionately impact newcomers and people with disabilities, you could reach out to community organizations, places, for example, that support newcomers, that provide support for people with disabilities, and tap into those communities to hear feedback and to hear perspectives on that decision. I'm seeing that you can, from Tina, you should include many in the conversation. Wonderful. Bernia, offer customer service options, virtual, phone, in-person, email questions, chat bots. Yeah, the options are in 2026. There's a robot for that. No, there's so many options, right? There's so many things, so many ways that we can consider making our services accessible and that different groups are not negatively impacted by the decisions that we make. And so again, it might mean more consultation. It might be that plus some different opportunities on how to get customer support in an accessible way. I love a model. So I've created this space model as an additional way that we can invite different perspectives and make sure that voices are being heard. And it's honestly quite intuitive. So this is not rocket science for anyone, but the first thing is just to set the tone, right? That we want to hear different perspectives. The second is to provide different ways for people to participate. And Bernia, you've talked about that with written submissions. Asking for difference. So in 2026, people don't like it when people disagree, but I'm saying we need to disagree. And so setting the stage for respectful, constructive disagreement, right? Dialogue, not debate. Create pause space. Not everybody is going to immediately respond. Extroverts do. A lot of people are not. And of course, as we talked about in allyship, we need to actively listen. So I'll go through each of these and I'll leave you with the slides. So if you want to dig into any of these in more depth, you're welcome to. And this is the last bit of our session today. So setting the tone, it's important right off the bat that we let people know our intention is to hear different perspectives. So often there's an assumption that to be kind, especially as Canadians, we have to agree with one another. In fact, kindness is being clear and honest about what we think. So we want people to feel safe to raise different perspectives, to disagree with us, to share a concern or a risk in a way that is respectful. Never attacking somebody, never tearing somebody down, but rather focusing on issues, right? It's not about people, it's about issues. And so it's creating that norm that we're not debating, we're going to have dialogue. So we can use sentences like this. If this doesn't fit your experience, I'd love to hear what does, right? This is my perspective. This is my experience. If that doesn't resonate, great. Please tell me. I'd love to know. It's not being defensive. It's about being curious. And what you'll find is as you model that, people are more likely to take down their defenses and engage with you in curiosity as well. So set the tone right off the hop. I want to know what you think. I want you to disagree. I want you to raise concerns. Give them different ways they can do that. So as we talked about earlier, just because someone is silent or doesn't show up, it doesn't mean they're not engaged or that they agree with you. In fact, silence is often more of a sign of disagreement. So we need to just pause and create different ways that people can share their perspectives with us. It might mean that there's one-to-ones, maybe it's through email, maybe it's an anonymous form. There's lots of different ways in a group discussion that people can contribute. And a speaking point around this could just be to reinforce, look, there's no one way that you can reach me or tell me your thoughts. Here are some ideas on how you can share that with me. And if anything comes to mind later, I know we're having this one-to-one, but if something strikes you later, here's my email address, here's my phone number, here's how you can get in touch with me, because often things will occur to people after the conversation. So give people lots of different pathways. This is important because people have different cognitive styles, right? We process information so differently as people. So the ways that people are going to provide input and think is going to be vastly different across different populations. In meetings, when you're engaging with groups of people, it's okay to spark constructive dialogue. So by this, I mean saying things like, okay, I heard that from Brian. Someone give me a totally different perspective, right? Or now we know Bernia's perspective on this. Who has a counterpoint? So instead of focusing on, this person's right or this person's wrong, our goal is just to try to generate as many different ideas as possible. If you're not hearing anything, and this one's a bit uncomfortable, you can say something like, I want to hear 2 concerns before I move on. I know that this plan, this idea is not perfect. So before I move on, I'd really like to hear 2 risks, 2 holes that someone can poke in this argument, because I really want to get it right. So when you ask for difference, you take that stigma and that fear away that if we're disagreeing with one another, we're difficult or unkind. And for many of us, that's a real fear, right? Being seen as difficult can be a real barrier. So make it easier on folks. Create pause space. Might not have been the best role model of that today, but create space for reflection before you react. So you might put a question up and say, we're going to take 2 minutes individually. So before anyone raises their hand and shares, let's take 2 minutes. We're going to set a timer and then we're going to discuss. The introverts in your life are going to love you. Because what often happens is the extroverts dominate the conversation and they don't create space for other people to be heard. Also, when we talk about neurodiversity, when we talk about language, there's so many reasons why a person might take some time right before they share. And so it just helps to set more of an even playing field between people. If you're noticing people are just, maybe circling and not getting to clear on their perspectives, you might just say, okay, we're just going to take time away and we'll come back to this in 10 minutes. We'll come back to this tomorrow. This point could use further reflection or discussion. So it's just taking some time. And last but not least, engage through listening. As we talked about earlier, listening is so important. It's validating to people. It helps people feel that they matter. What we talked about earlier, people are not alone. They feel that they are valued. So just recognizing that you showing up and listening is powerful, and it's a huge action in and of itself. You've probably heard listening is not about waiting for your turn to speak. Rather, it's about pausing, seeking to understand, and then reflecting back. So what I'm hearing from you is, and asking questions like, tell me more. So someone might say something like, this was really hard for me, or I'm really struggling, or I'm very concerned, or my child is going through something hard. Tell me more. Tell me more. Say more about that. What was that like for you? What was important to you about that? Asking curious, open-ended questions helps the individual to open up more, and it helps you to better understand what's important to them and how you might be able to advocate and support. And of course, acknowledge contributions. So when people are sharing with you what the contributions and impact they've had, making sure that you're passing that along and recognizing people for the impact that they're having. I'll share with you these slides, but this is your little cheat sheet on how you do each of these things. So set the tone, provide multiple pathways, ask for difference, create a pause space, and engage through listening. And boy, was I ever happy to make an acronym out of that. Create space. So all in a nutshell, conscious inclusion, it's about being deliberate, asking yourself questions like, whose perspectives are we missing? Who might this decision experience? Who might experience this decision differently? You can tell it's almost my bedtime. How easy or hard is it for people to participate? How can we ensure that voices are heard? And you have tools to help you do all of those things. Act as an ally, raise purple flags, use that social identity wheel, both to introspect about yourself, but also to understand or identify the communities that might be underrepresented, might not be engaged, whose voices are so critical. And then use that space model in order for you to hear different perspectives so that you can ensure that you're looking at things from different angles and not just, from your lens or from the voices that might be the loudest in your ear. I would love, before we close, this has been a journey for Oxford County. So you, of course, have this commitment. We saw it in your strategic plan. We saw it in your values. We have an action plan, a DEI action plan that has a clear vision statement. It's being renewed and updated to guide ongoing efforts. There's also been staff training that has been rolling out, conscious inclusion staff training to help build awareness and support inclusive behaviors. There's also been resources that have been shared through internal communication. And the county has also been highlighting days of significance that are related to diversity and inclusion through connections. So lots of work has been underway on this because, of course, it's important that this is all encompassing in the work that's being done across the county. So before we wrap, I'd love to just pause and hear if there's anything that's coming up for you as an action or a learning that you're going to take away from today's discussion. That's one thing.
try to let others go first, but no one's doing it. So that's
I love it. Jerry, thank you. Ask what? Yeah. Anytime you hear that why pop up, exactly. Yeah. Try to reframe to a what if you can. You'll notice a different response. Any other actions? Asking more about whose perspective might be missing. Yeah. Absolutely. Use that wheel. It's something that you can print and bring with you just to remind yourself of the diversities. Again, it's not everything, but it helps to remind us of all the different ways that people differ. Yeah. And when you really want to influence someone's behavior, give them a red jelly bean. I think that's another action. Just joking. You've all been fabulous. Thank you so much for your time and for your attention. I recognize that you might have questions that come up after today, or you might have additional thoughts or maybe counter perspectives. You can reach me at hello@liveempowered.ca or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Michelle Grohalski. I would welcome to hear anything that's coming up for you. And just thank you for your continued commitment to this important work. I truly believe that it's going to help you in terms of your vision of creating those welcoming spaces where people feel that they belong and have that incredible sense of well-being. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for such a great session. And I would like to thank my attendees as well for participating. I really, really hope that this session will help all of us in our DEI journeys. And feel free to even get in touch with me. And as Michelle has mentioned, get in touch with her. And I'll leave it here. And thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.